What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be taking a dive into the Rakdos Sacrifice archetype and kind of giving a little overview, ins and outs of the deck, and kind of reiterating the fact that I think this is one of the best decks to currently be playing in Pioneer, just for some of the versatility that it has. But of course, before we get too deep into all of that, I would like to say if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to support my content, it's one of the it's a free way, easy thing to do. Uh, Please consider subscribing. I do a lot of modern stuff, Pioneer content, as well as some other essay type videos too. So if that's something that interests you, subscribe, ring notification bell, all that fun stuff. Travel down to the description of this video. You'll be able to find the link to the deck list that you see here, to my Twitch channel, and to the Discord server as well. Feel free to join and follow me on Twitch so you know when I go live over there. So Rakdos Sacrifice, there's essentially two Rakdos like archetypes in Pioneer, and we have like the traditional mid-range, which I believe is like a true mid-range deck that can get to the board very quickly in terms of power pretty early on, while also playing like a pretty good control, like be able to sit back and just kind of like 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 your opponent until you're able to kind of like turn the corner and win the game. Rakdos Sacrifice has a little bit harder of a time trying to win the game necessarily through like aggressive like attacking and getting into the red zone, but what it does do very well, it is able to play very defensive and have some all these moving parts that all kind of synergize well together, and the more of them that you kind of assemble, the a lot easier it is to actually just win the game without ever really having to go into like your combat step. So really kind of and a weird thing to think about is Witch's Oven being kind of like a catalyst for this deck, just because it has a few synergies with a lot of like your creatures and with even some of your spells like Claim the Firstborn. So starting up here, the usual combo for like Witch's Oven is, an oven and a Cauldron Familiar, where you want more ovens in this case instead of Cauldron Familiars. And the reason why is that you can sacrifice the Cauldron Familiar to a Witch's Oven, create a food token, sacrifice the food token, bring the Cauldron Familiar back, ding your opponent. If you have multiple cats, it doesn't really matter because you're only able to sacrifice one, get one food token, bring one back. If you have multiple Witch's Ovens, you essentially get a ping for each oven. In conjunction with Mayhem Devil, this loop has two sacrifices, sacrificing the cat to the oven and then sacrificing the food to get the cat back. So essentially you can deal 2 damage to any target going through this loop and drain your opponent for 1. So you can either hit your opponent for 2 damage and then drain them for 1 life. You can pick off their board if they're like playing an aggressive deck, kind of like mono white, or even like in the mirror, you can just kind of start pinging their stuff down. It gets a little hairy when they have a Mayhem Devil as well. But just that being one of the normal lines of play is like playing a Cauldron Familiar, play some Witch's Ovens, get a Mayhem Devil down, start pinging your opponent and dealing tons of damage again without really having to use the combat step. Even like Unlucky Witness is a good card to be playing with a Witch's Oven, because if you need to find like maybe a land, you're still running low on gas and you need to find something to play, Unlucky Witness gets you a look at 2 cards. You can only play one of them until your next end step, but with that said, you are still essentially getting some kind of like card advantage from it. You're like trading the Unlucky Witness for a card that hopefully is a lot more relevant than the 1/1 for 1. Even Croxa, like if you just cast this from your hand, paying the 2 mana, you can sacrifice to an oven and get 2 food, and that will give you some future synergy down the road with like a Cauldron Familiar with a Mayhem Devil. A neat trick that you can do with the Cauldron Familiar if you have multiple food tokens and not very many sack outlets is that with a Mayhem Devil in play, you can sacrifice a food, put Cauldron Familiar's ability to return on the stack, and then like hold priority and sacrifice more food tokens to activate it more times. If you just need kind of like a big burst of damage, maybe clearing away some creatures or even just finishing off your opponent, that is kind of like a sneaky trick that you can do to burn your opponent out of the game. Essentially is just holding priority and continuing to sack food to bring the Cauldron Familiar back to then like deal them the last points of damage that you need, which is kind of why sacrificing a Croxa to like its ETB trigger to sacrifice it, can just get you more food tokens that can, end up dealing more damage to your opponent. And then finally, like Claim the Firstborn, which I think is the one that was maybe not as popular or whatever with like Cauldron Familiar, but like Claim the Firstborn, Cauldron Familiar, and Witch's Oven, pretty synonymous as a grouping, especially when they were in Standard back when Eldraine was legal. You gain control of a creature, convert mana cost 3 or less. You untap it, it gains haste until end of turn. Pretty good. It's actually fairly good against like mono green, and you can take their the trolls, their Polucrinoses, what have you, get in for a ton of damage, get in for like 4, 5, 6 points of damage with all of your other creatures, sacrifice it to your Witch's Oven, end up making 2 foods, and in the case of like the troll, like you deny them mana because the troll will try to attach like one of your lands instead of one of their lands since it's under your control. So definitely has some good synergy there. It's kind of a way that you can like win that matchup because it's also pretty tough, especially since they can just kind of go nuclear at like a moment's notice. So that's kind of like the idea of the deck, like where you kind of see where we're going, where like Witch's Oven kind of like gets the deck going, and these creatures just all get infinitely better with a Witch's Oven in play. Some of the other like elements to the deck, you have Fatal Pushes, you have Thoughtseize, you have Deadly Dispute. Fatal Push is like a way that you can kind of like get rid of some of the other like threatening creatures on the board. Creatures that can like threaten to close out the game a lot faster than you are to just kind of stall. Maybe getting rid of some trampling threats, just because that's kind of what the deck folds to. I mean, a lot of the time you want to be able to block like your opponent's biggest thing with like a Cauldron Familiar, sacrifice it to an Oven, whatever, or if I have some way to get it back, so then that way, you can just fog like a ton of damage from a permanent until you're able to drain your opponent out of the game. You have Thoughtseize. It's a card that I always think its praises have been for, since the mid 2010s when I really started playing competitive Magic. Thoughtseize is an underrated card, which I think is like so easy to play wrong, and it maybe like skill intensive in the way that like players don't realize that it is, where like sometimes it seems like, yeah, no shit, like you take the best card out of your opponent's hand, but definitely identifying what the best card in your opponent's hand is, and like the long-term effects of what you're letting them keep, or maybe what you're taking, what have you. It is deceptively a very skill-intensive card, and if good players playing with this card will be able to utilize it to its full potential, while other players can get super punished by just taking the wrong card without even realizing they took the wrong card. To go further, you have Deadly Dispute as kind of like this last, card. You can sacrifice an artifact or a creature. This deck, we have food tokens made by Witch's Oven. You have Bloodtithe Harvester making blood tokens and so on. Of course, like you want to sacrifice like an Unlucky Witness to the Deadly Dispute, just because you get to draw 2 cards, create a treasure token, and then of course get the exile effect from Unlucky Witness to kind of see some more cards, like virtually drawing 3 cards with like a Deadly Dispute and making a treasure, meaning that come to your turn 3, you end up having 4 mana, and it kind of opens up some more possibilities, where you can like play a Thoughtseize and then clear the way for like a Mayhem Devil or a Fable the Mirror Breaker, which Fable also is pretty interesting for this deck in the fact that the Goblin, the 2/2 Shaman, that's like another permanent that you can try to get in damage with, attacking with it. And of course, getting to attack with it means that you're also creating mana and you're generating this mana advantage. And the treasures, the fact that they sacrifice, meaning that they have synergy with the Mayhem Devil, where you can like ping your opponent, float mana, so on. Try to like control the board a little bit. Looting away, as you've like noticed that this deck has a very low curve. Like it really technically tops out of 5 with like Jengatha, if you really want to like end up playing it. But realistically, 4 mana to be able to escape a Kroxa, which will also fuel the Kroxa by discarding cards from your hand, getting to draw new cards, ditching some of these lands that you end up drawing, because again, once you get to like 4 or 5 mana, it's at that point nice to be able to hit land drops and stuff, but you have, a few other ways of generating mana that you don't necessarily need to hit your land drop, past like turn 5 or turn 6. So this, in a way, like helps you get rid of some of those lands, can help you find that 4th or 5th land that you might need to bring back the Crocs, or even cast like Jangotha, or just be able to play like 2 big spells like a Mayhem Devil or like a Blood Tithe Harvester or something all in the same turn. And then the backside, getting to create tokens, and the fact that those tokens end up getting sacrificed. You have, of course, like if you have 2 Fables in play and you're able to have one that's not summoning sick, flip the other one, you just make a ton of Reflection of Kiki-Jikis that then in turn could make a bunch of copies of Mayhem Devil or Cauldron Familiar, what have you. Some of these other cards, Blood Tithe Harvester even being like a pretty good one. You can make a bunch of copies of those cards, and they sacrifice themselves at the end step. If you make a bunch of Mayhem Devils, even if you make like 3 or 4 Reflection of Kiki-Jikis, then you end up making like 3 or 4 Mayhem Devils. That's just going to win you the game, because that is just going to be an absurd amount of damage, and like you don't even have to attack with those creatures. And if you get to, it's just a totally added bonus to everything. You like look through the rest of the deck. I mean, like a lot of your lands, like you have play like Blackleaf Cliffs, you have Blightstep Pathways, Blood Crypt, you have Den of the Bugbear, while having like no inherent like sacrifice like synergy. The fact that it does create like creature tokens does mean that you have something to sacrifice later to like Deadly Disputes to hopefully end up drawing some gas. Of course, generating a little bit more mana by creating the treasure token. Chances are, like if you're attacking with like a Den of the Bugbear, like in the late game, it is to kind of set up something with like a Deadly Dispute, or like to be able to like have a creature to sacrifice to try to get something going. And like the other like small percentage of the time, it's like trying to close out the game through the combat step. Hive of the Eye Tyrant is also a way that you can kind of like manage your opponent's graveyard. People, Greasefang isn't like very popular at the moment, understandably, but still having like that added benefit against like Greasefang. Some of the other decks, like you have Mono Green, who can get things back from their graveyard. So if you just hit like a key piece, get rid of their Storm the Festivals and things like that. Sokenzen is a way that you can make tokens, and Takanuma is a way to, get back a creature or planeswalker, being mainly creatures, because this deck doesn't play any planeswalkers besides the Obnixiluses in the sideboard. Whew. We're there. We made it to the end. So essentially, like the overall analysis of like this Rakdos sacrifice deck is that you are like a more passive version of like the Rakdos midrange deck. I think Rakdos midrange is very capable of just being super aggressive, being able to curve, Thoughtseize into a Blood Tithe Harvester, into like a Bone Crusher Giant, not even needing to like cast Stomp, into like a Shieldred, and from there, it's able to control the board with Fatal Pushes, with the with future Blood Tithe Harvesters, and go for the throats and things like that. Where this deck in particular is just able to take some key threats from your opponent with Thoughtseizes, extend a little bit of advantage through, drawing extra cards with Unlucky Witness and with Deadly Dispute, and then of course like anything that's kind of left from there, you're able to like claim the Firstborn, attack with it, chip, get some chip damage in on your opponent, sacrifice it, get a benefit for you as like a food, something that you can sacrifice later to deal damage with a Mayhem Devil, get back Cauldron Familiars, so on, while also kind of acting like an additional removal spell, for your opponent's like biggest threat on the board. The fact that Claim the Firstborn hits, basically all the important creatures in the mono green deck, minus like Cavalier Thorns. You get Adeline from like the mono white deck. You get opposing Mayhem Devils, things like that. It's just a very versatile card that will take a relevant threat and then also turn it into food, metaphorically and literally, and just kind of keep pushing and extending this board advantage that you can create in these scenarios. Definitely a key card in this is Mayhem Devil. Mayhem Devil is like the main like payoff for having all of these like permanents and all these other cards that allow you to sacrifice other permanents and other cards. We had a match that we played against like Azorius Spirits, and just the fact that they, played in a way where like we stuck a Mayhem Devil, we had Culture Familiar and Witch's Oven, we were just able to ping down a lot of like their spirits and eventually get to the point where we could deal enough damage where we were taking out like 2 creatures a turn. And in that deck that tries to tempo your opponent out when you're doing the tempoing to them, which I guess could be a way that you could describe this deck, they have a very hard time winning the game. On top of the fact too that you do have some built-in card advantage with some of your other cards that are like just okay at their face value, but end up getting better the more sacrifice synergies you kind of stack on them. So that is the Rakdos Sacrifice deck for the Pioneer format. Hopefully y'all learned something, and it's a deck that you're willing to pick up and play. It's a deck that I had a lot of success with towards the end of like the Mana Traders, like Pioneer stuff. Just couldn't end up actually playing enough matches to end up qualifying, unfortunately. But with that being said, the deck is very powerful. Definitely understanding like some of the sequencing of your synergies and understanding kind of where and when to go for a lot of things. This deck definitely is going to blow you away like on a power level front. It's not flashy like the mono green or even like Azorius Spirits, but it definitely gets the job done and can definitely throw around its own weight, and kind of the reason why it gets like the nod from me anyway as being one of the better decks to be playing in the Pioneer format. Really probably one of the best decks to play, aside from like mono green. Just, without even necessarily speculating on like future bans and stuff like that, but there's nothing really in this deck that could go away except for maybe Fable, and I think even if Fable goes away, I think the deck is pretty okay for the most part. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video, comment down below what other decks that you would like to see, and of course follow the links in the description that I have. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you all in the next one.